welcome everybody. So this is the first MV lecture back in the theatre since March last year. So it's really great to see everyone here, and thank you for everyone who's joining us online as well. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that our Museums Victoria, the three campuses and where we are today, Melbourne Museum, stand on the unceded lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're guests on their country. I pay my respects to the elders and the community of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung. My name's Kimberly Moulton. I'm a Yorta woman. I grew up in country Victoria in Shepparton and live and work here now on the beautiful lands of Kulin people, and I'm the Senior Curator for Southeastern Aboriginal Collections for Museums Victoria. And along with my wonderful colleagues, Senior Curators Beck Harland and Kate Phillip, we produce and deliver the MV lecture program. Tonight, we are proud to be partnering with Melbourne Knowledge Week and have been able to offer this event free with the generous support of Aboriginal Melbourne at the City of Melbourne. I'd like to again welcome back those who regularly join us online during the COVID isolation. We did quite a few lectures over last year, and for those of you that haven't joined us before, MV Lectures showcases our collections, our people, and our extended networks of experts and communities. This is the second lecture in the first series of the 2021 Fire, Past, Present and Future. And this represents the rich tapestry of knowledge within Museums Victoria networks and provides context for the understanding of the complex experience of bushfire in southeastern Australia. Our speakers will generously share their knowledge, and I'll facilitate our Q&A after the session. So if you have questions, that will be the time to ask them. For those of you watching online, there's a Q&A button, and at the bottom of the screen and also on the Knowledge Week digital hub, there's also a space where you can be asking questions, so you won't miss out if you have a question as well. So to just begin and set the scene a little bit, bushfires have been a characteristic of this continent for millions of years. It has been a feature of human experience of this land for more than 60,000 years, for time immemorial. The 2009 Victorian bushfires were the worst natural disaster in Australia's recorded history. A staggering 173 people lost their lives. Over 2,000 homes were destroyed. 7,000 people were left homeless, and countless animals lost and injured. In the 2019 and 2020 Black Summer fires, they shocked the entire world as it appeared the entire southeastern seaboard was on fire. Museum collections and exhibitions play a role in recording these events, representing bushfire experiences of this country, and hold safe in memory and in the historical records for futures to learn about and to honour the memory of the people lost, the fight to save country in that continuing fight, and the science around bushfires. So tonight's presentation poses one of the big questions of our time and our region. How do we live with fire in a time of catastrophic climate change? So we've got some pretty amazing speakers tonight, and we're really lucky to have all three of these wonderful, strong Koorie men on stage with us. And the first speaker I'll introduce is Michael Shawn Fletcher. Associate Professor Michael Shawn Fletcher is a Wiradjuri man, physical geography researcher and Assistant Dean Indigenous for the Faculty of Science at the University of Melbourne. He is also Director of Research Capability at the Indigenous Knowledge Institute. His interests are in long-term interactions between humans, climate, disturbance, and vegetation at a local, regional, and global scale. Professor Fletcher's current work involves developing and integrating high-resolution paleo environmental records from across the Southern Hemisphere, including multiple proxies, including microfossil, charcoal, geochemical, and isotopic analysis to provide comprehensive reconstructions of environmental change. I'd like to welcome Michael up.
Thanks for that. It's a mouthful, yeah. I'd also like to acknowledge country and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those who will carry the knowledge forward. The premise of tonight, as you probably guessed, given that there's two deadly Aboriginal people and myself up here to talk, along with our wonderful host, is the role that Aboriginal knowledge or traditional knowledge or Indigenous knowledge might have in helping with the situation we find ourselves in. And this book, recently by Victor Stephenson, Fire Country, How Indigenous Management Could Help Save Australia, is a really important contribution to this conversation. But I often like to touch base with our purpose, the why here. I think there's a lot of conversation about returning cultural burning, using Indigenous knowledge to help us in this continent, in this country, but I don't think we often pay attention to the why and the situation we're in. If we think about it, we're in an era where a very dominant part of the discourse over the world we live in is climate change, anthropogenic climate change. And here's a paper we put together in 2018, so a little while ago now, where we identified a series of ecological catastrophes, if you like, and linked them to a climatic signature. But these, I would argue, are a symptom, not a cause. Many of these. 3 of these involve forest ecosystems and fire. So one of the things I hope, well, there's 2 things I hope out of this, or 3, is to give you some of that foundational understanding of why, debunk the myth that this is all about climate change, and hopefully debunk the myth that there is this thing called wilderness. So we're undergoing what I would term and have termed a continental unravelling. Here on the right-hand side is a plot of species extinctions, okay, in Australia, in this continent, over the last couple of 100 years. You can see here, there's a real ramping up of species extinction. And we're now have the dubious honour of owning the highest rate of extinction biodiversity loss on Earth in this continent. The thing I want you to understand here is that this began in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Anthropogenic climate change started kicking in with earnest in the mid-1900s. This isn't a solely climate change phenomenon. Here I've worked out catastrophic bushfires in southeast Australia that I could find in the literature over the similar time period, and it's a cumulative plot. You can see the first recorded bushfires in southeast Australia, not including Tasmania, were in the mid-1800s, and they ramp up through to present. Again, the timing is all wrong. These things started setting in before anthropogenic climate change. And I want to unpack that a little bit with you as we go along. So we're living in a world of polarised views. Things like Twitter and that don't help it, as addictive as they are. You get narratives like Bill Gamage's that every part of the Australian continent was actively managed. And at the other extreme, you get these notions that Aboriginal people had very little impact and they were just mirroring what they saw around them and had no impact in the nature and structure of the landscape. So what my aim academically or scientifically, the other thing we need to remember, and I think this is one of the most powerful figures you'll ever see, even though it represents one of the greatest thefts of knowledge and appropriation of knowledge that there is, okay, by Tyndale. This is a language map of Australia, okay? There is no part of this continent that wasn't occupied at the time of the British invasion, yeah? I have actually mocked up some caricatures of, those stickers you see on the back of utes are like Australia's full, like I often put this up with an Australia's full sign on it because, Australia was full and it was actively managed. So the things we need to bear in mind. So in touching base with why do we need to return Aboriginal burning to country, we need to think about what did Aboriginal people do to this country? How have we shaped this country? And I've done a lot of work in Tasmania. There's work I've started in Southeast Australia, prompted by the latest catastrophic bushfires. So this work that I'm going to show you now is being replicated elsewhere. We know from archaeological evidence that people arrived into the north of Australia at least 65 to 68,000 years ago. The earliest archaeology is in the Flinders Ranges around 50,000 years ago, so people migrated through. You'll see by the silhouette here that the configuration of the continent was significantly different. People arrived during an ice age. Now, not quite like the animation ice age where there's that little squirrel running around chasing acorns. It's not all covered in ice. What happens is that a lot of moisture is locked up in polar ice caps and mountain ice caps, and you get a lot drier situation, more open country. And sea levels are much depressed, okay? So you can walk from Papua New Guinea to Northern Australia. At periods of times, you could walk to Tasmania, and I'll show you that in a moment. And a very, very different kind of country that Aboriginal people came into, of which fire was already a part. The eucalypts, the key fire species, arguably globally, evolved tens of millions of years ago. So fire was a part of this country. So into Tasmania, the reason I focus on Tasmania is that if we look at this map here, as I said, the earliest evidence of arrival here 68,000 years ago, it could well be before. There are people working on sites down here that may well be 120,000 years old. We don't know. This is just the earliest bit of evidence, and absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Okay, so people could have come in a long time ago. One thing, we have a fairly good constraint on the Tasmanian situation because there's very discrete periods over the last 120,000 years, 140,000 years across the bottom here, 140 to present, where this red line exceeds the black line, when people could have got into the place. Yeah, so it's fairly constrained, and they came in most likely through this what they call the eastern sill, the extension of the Prom, down in through northeast Tasmania. So I'm going to data, okay, data. All the stuff that I was introduced was all about science and data. It was just one form of knowing. Yeah, it's just one form of understanding. It's a particular epistemology. It's quite a narcissistic one. It only believes itself and only validates itself and all of this sort of stuff. But we've got to use what we can, okay? So in this attempt here, I want to, and quite often decisions are made on data, and the sick irony is that a lot of the data that's produced is framed within a kind of epistemology that excludes other ways of knowing. So you only end up talking to yourself in what people have called a hall of mirrors. You only ever see yourself. But we can use this. We can use data for purposes. So I use these lakes and bogs and swamps. They're continuously collecting information. I float these things out into lakes. I do all the work while the students are sitting there slacking off. Float out, get these mud cores out, and that's a history book. Yeah, I pull out all the information that's in that book and I reconstruct the past. Have these beautiful cores which we slice up. Some of them are really banded, showing different things that are going on. And I pull out of it little bits of plants and charcoal and all this sort of stuff, and I reconstruct the past. I get in essentially a time machine, okay? And I also drill into trees and work out when they've established. This one was burnt, so the number of rings that accumulated after the burn, you can say, okay, that fire occurred X number of years ago. These cores into trees can show me when trees became established. And through this combination of information, I reconstruct landscapes. So I want to take into this, it's a bit complicated, so don't worry about it, just listen to my words and drift off to sleep. So here's down the bottom, 270,000 years ago to present, okay? Here's that sea level map I just showed you a minute ago, except I think I flipped it. So anything above the line, you can cross into Tasmania, anything below the line, you can't. We can see that it flips up and down. We know that people arrived at least 68,000 years ago in Northern Australia, so they weren't available to populate Tasmania when that little red blip was when they could have crossed. The next little red blip that there was, we see archaeology immediately appearing in Tasmania, okay? So people just, they were there, Australia was full, and people went over and filled up Tasmania. What was the influence? Now, I don't want to go into this too much, but this is one particular plant type in this long record that I've pulled out of a lake, 270,000 years. And this is the amount of grass in the landscape. So it goes up, down, up, down, up, down. And this is following big orbital changes in solar radiation, and you get your ice ages, So this period covers 3 ice ages, right? Ice age, not ice age, ice age, not ice age, ice age. As soon as people arrive, there's more grass in the landscape than there has been over the last 270,000 years, despite the fact there's 2 previous ice ages. Yeah, so people are changing things immediately. They're changing things profoundly. The other thing here, and this is where this grass starts dipping down, that's at the end of the last ice age and the kind of climate we're living in now. Normally in Tasmania, rainforests would have moved in the absence of people, the absence of fire, but no. this completely novel ecosystem moves in. It's never been there before over the last 270,000 years. A profound influence on the nature and characteristic of that landscape. And does anyone want to guess where this is in Tasmania? The answer is quite ironic. It's in the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. Yeah, this is wilderness. It's a human construct being made by people. And the definition of wilderness, no matter what the scientists try and do, is a place without people, in which people have had no influence. Okay, this is the kind of country you see, open country, which is the kind of country that people throughout the evolution of humans more than 2 million years ago, okay, have benefited from open country. What humans like is open country. There are pockets of forest we use, you know, we protect forests for certain resources, all this sort of stuff, but by and large, we seek open country and we make open country. So the key message here is that the arrival of Aboriginal people in Tasmania occurred immediately after the appearance of land bridge. Aboriginal people radically altered the landscape, okay, introduced more grass into country and created a novel human ecosystem. So what happens, I'll race through this now, when you end that, which is what happened in the British invasion. Mob were pulled off country. Okay, we're still being pulled off country. The economic and policy mechanisms now, although there's a big resurgence to people getting back on country. It's a pity that takes catastrophes like the 2019-2020 catastrophic fires to give the move a kick up the butt. Okay, so here's a part of Tasmania again. Okay, I just want to talk you through this one little quote. I don't like doing them, but this country here was open country. The whole country here is grassy. Timber found on these hills is in general of fine growth. Very tall, straight. Some of it would measure more than 100 feet to the lowest branch. Trees are in many places 100 yards apart. It's a long way, yeah? I don't know what a yard is. Does anyone quickly want to... A yard's a metre? 100 metres apart. Close enough, good one. They are principally peppermint and stringy bark, a couple of types of eucalypts. It will not, in general, average 10 trees on an acre. Open country, right? There are many plains of several square miles without a single tree. What happens after the British invasion and people were pulled off this country? Okay, after 1828, when Hellier was describing this, some time went by, the Van Diemen's Land Company, that wonderfully politically correct and awesome company, that are responsible for numerous massacres in northwest Tasmania, and they are still there. You still drive up to Woolnorth in the north, and there's VDL on the posts. I think we should chuck some spears into them or something like that, you know. Anyway, get off that. The VDL took over this country, asked the Aboriginal people to leave politely. And this is the drilling into the trees that I showed you a moment ago, yeah? So this is the number of trees that established, that started growing in that decade, right? Does anyone notice a particular thing going on there? Yeah. In the mid-1800s, there's an explosion of trees following the removal of Aboriginal people from this country. The Surrey Hills is 10,000 hectares. Anyone want to guess what this country is called now? Wilderness. Oh, it's got a different name now. It's one of the poster children of the wilderness movement. It's the Tarkine. It's parts of the Tarkine. Yeah. I'll skip through this. This is what it looks like now. Yeah, and I've just sort of picked this. This is an old ute stump, big old obliqua. Yeah, this is what it looked like under Aboriginal management. Yeah, there is no such thing as wilderness. I can take you through example after example, from the Amazon to Southeast Asia, through to South America, example after example after example of putative wilderness. Papua New Guinea, the most linguistic diverse place on earth, the place where the first evidence of agriculture arose, is called a wilderness by certain NGOs. So what happens when you end cultural burning? Okay, now this is in northern Tasmania. Across northern Tasmania, the next slide is what I'm going to show you. The Launceston was settled by white people in 1700s, late 1700s, early 1800s. These big vegetation shifts happened in the 1850s. So people are up there for 50, 60 years living in this country, right? Before, hey presto, immediately those trees expand, you get the first recorded catastrophic fires in Tasmania. Yeah? What does fire need? It needs a bit of light, a bit of ignition, needs a bit of air, and it needs fuel, yeah? What are trees? Fuel. So let's go to Southeast Australia and have a look at the story there. You know, and we often draw on the ethno-pictorial record, these landscape paintings by people like Eugene von Gerard and others. Buchan, radically different in the 1800s to now. Mount Gambier, radically different in the 1800s to now. Bellarine Peninsula, Barwon, radically different. Lake Surprise, Mount Eccles, Budge Bim, out near Warrnambool, radically different. All of these open landscapes have become forested, yeah? Even happens around Uluru, yeah, except the trees there are shrubs, yeah? Spinifex, Thermidor grasslands turn into kinopod shrubs. So what happens when you do this? Here's the red is the 2019, 2020 bushfires. The yellow dots, and I really hate talking about this, but it's the truth. You know, massacres are one thing. Disease also backed up massacres. The green is the spread of eucalypt forests across Southeast Australia. Pretty overlapping, yeah? What are now eucalypt forests? What are now eucalypt forests? This is where all mob were massacred in Southeast Australia. So what happens if you plot this on timeline? The massacres occurred here around about the same amount of time that it takes for fuel to accumulate in these forests. And you read Ross Bradstock and other people, foresters like this, 30, 35 years for ground to mid to elevated fuels. I can reel off all the scientific lingo for you if you want about how this happens, but it happens. You get a ramp up in catastrophic bushfires in this country before climate change. Now, there's no doubt whatsoever that climate change is exacerbating things, but this is not solely a climate change problem. It's a management of country problem. And I love this. I normally do an animation, but it would just seem too hard. This is Mardu country. And here, I encourage people to read this Watson paper in 2018, where they use science and computers and everything to define what wilderness is. And then, hey presto, their computer models validate what they thought in the first place. A great example of narcissistic inward-looking science. And they list all these wilderness areas, okay? The Amazon. I know a few people in the Amazon. It's not wilderness, you know. This is where things like corn and wild rice and other important crop species come from, where the very soils are anthropogenic soils, all this sort of stuff. Mardu country in Central Australia is wilderness. So here's a map of Mardu country managed, Mardu country unmanaged for various reasons to do with the British invasion. Over a 10-year period, okay, where country is managed by people versus country that's not managed by people, at the end of the 10-year period, there are 76 fires that occurred in Mardu country, 4 out of Mardu country. The fires in Mardu country are 0.07 square kilometres on average. They're 2 square kilometres on average here. They're infinitely larger, infrequent. Is it sounding familiar? Infrequent, large, catastrophic bushfires. What about ecological diversity? It's double in Mardu country. Yeah, so the very ecological values that these wilderness areas are prized upon are an Aboriginal construct. They're a human construct. So some of my summaries or conjectures, if you like. The unravelling of the Australian continent began before climate change. British invasion saw a major disruption to Aboriginal management of country. Catastrophic bushfires began before climate change in Australia, and primarily as a result of high fuel loads because of the removal of fire. Climate change has further exacerbated this problem. We urgently, and fellas after this will back this up hopefully, urgently need a return to Aboriginal-led management of country based on local scale connections to the country and a lot more fire. And the wilderness myth serves only to exclude people, okay, and it does. It's been used to exclude people and continually is used to exclude people and destroy country in the process. Don't know if I went over or under, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Incredible, and a lot of food for thought, and that line of management of country is the problem. So we can discuss more about that in the Q&A time, but that's incredible research. So our next speaker is Matt Shanks. And Matt Shanks is a Nira Bullock man of the Tunnerong Nation. He works for his mob at the Tunnerong Land and Waters Council as a cultural and natural resource management strategic advisor. Previous roles have seen him support Victorian traditional owners to reactivate rights to manage country and reinvigorate cultural fire knowledge and practices at the Federation of Victorian Traditional Owner Corporations. And this was through the development of the Victorian Traditional Owner Cultural Fire Strategy. So, Matt, I'll come up.
Thank you. Wawa, first of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging country that we're meeting from today, the unceded territories of the Bunurong and Woiwurrung nations. I pay my respects to their ancestors, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to pay my respects to my ancestors and my elders, past, present, and emerging. I take a lot of sort of pride, direction, and a lot of empowerment from them. As Kimberly mentioned, my name's Matt Shanks. I'm a Tunnerong man. My clan's the Nirabulug. My clan territories largely in the south west of Tunnerong country. We sort of border Djadjurrung and Woiwurrung country. I'm going to read off a piece of paper, unlike Michael. I've been lucky enough to work with Michael a little bit over the last couple of years, and his presentation is quite heavy at times, but that's a really wonderful thing for Aboriginal people and my people in particular, as I'll sort of get into through my presentation. I know Trent as well. It sets the context for what we're seeking to achieve and sort of negotiate with the state. The flag on the screen is the Tunnerong sovereign flag. We went through a lengthy design process last year following the finalisation of our recognition and settlement agreement, which is really enabling us, the Tunnerong Nation, to activate our rights and to heal and manage country again. The black represents the people, the brown is the earth, and a colour of an ochre found right across our country. The yellow represents the journey of our ancestors, and the stars are the seven sisters. As Kimberly mentioned, I work for my mob at the moment at Tunnerong Land and Waters Council in the Cultural Natural Resource Management team. I'm a strategic advisor. Tunnerong Land and Waters Council, or TLOC, is the traditional owner group entity that represents the Tunnerong Nation as appointed by the Tunnerong Nation in regards to the activation of our rights as recognised under the Traditional Owner Settlement Act and our Recognition and Settlement Agreement. That's important. I'll come to that shortly. We're also a registered Aboriginal party with delegated statutory functions under the Aboriginal Heritage Act. Day to day, we are a reference, consultation and representative body for the Tunnerong Nation within Tunnerong's territories. We assist our nation to activate their rights and, importantly, connected to the conversations tonight, empower our mob to reinvigorate Tunnerong knowledge and practices as it relates to the healing and management of country. I say all that because I don't think it's generally known or understood just how capable and ready traditional owners and traditional owner nations are to take on the role that we've been seeking to take on for 250, 270 years. To start making an impact again on country and lead by example by applying, teaching, sharing our knowledge built from more than 65,000 years of experience, undertaking our cultural obligations to care for country, as Michael's research describes. We have been managing country. It's not wilderness, and I don't need to go over all of that again. So it's a little bit of what is Tunnerong Land and Waters Council. I've sort of talked to that a little bit. The role of the Cultural Natural Resource Management team at Tunnerong is to progress the community's vision as it relates to cultural and natural resource management. As I've described, Tunnerong Land and Waters Council is the representative body for the Tunnerong Nation, and post the Recognition and Settlement Agreement, that's enabled us to create more teams and really work to build systems and practices and processes where we can be back on country again, having the impact that Michael's talked about earlier, and Trent will continue to describe during his presentation. I need to emphasise here the importance of community engagement and involvement in the development and implementation of these strategies. This isn't, people sitting in an office in Melbourne or central on country making decisions. It's really a deep and ongoing engagement with the community, understanding what they want, what they need to see, and ensuring that our cultural obligations are met, those cultural obligations to care for country that have been passed on to us since time immemorial. TLOC has sort of 4 emerging strategies coming out of the CNRM team through engagement with our community. Healing and strengthening knowledge is the first one. Development of knowledge circles on different areas of knowledge, healing knowledge transfer systems, including intergenerational, so elders sharing with younger generations, and across nation boundaries, which is important. We have many partnerships with our neighbours, all about relearning practice and knowledge together and applying that to heal and care for country. Healing practice is a major part of that, not just cultural fire, but all traditional owner management techniques of country. And developing research programs that are led by Tunnerong people to support our knowledges. Michael talked a little bit about some of the issues maybe with science and that sort of thing. We want to decolonise science and ensure that it's supporting the right knowledge and local knowledge that exists in country and has done for thousands and thousands of years. We then seek to apply those knowledges through healing country, so applying cultural landscape management techniques in important places and landscapes, managing for the abundance again of important species, but really taking a holistic approach and seeking to do that tenure blind, so right across our territories, irrespective of public and private sort of tenures. Obviously, there's difficulties and complications with that, but that's where relationships come in and why we're engaging so closely with our community, government agencies, our families and community as well to do that. Reading country is a really important part of redeveloping cultural management systems. Michael talked about a lot of the sort of indicators and that sort of thing that are on country that we look to decide when and where we apply different practices. A lot of those have sort of started to disappear, or many have disappeared. So we need to understand again, in a changed environment, what those indicators now look like. And we also seek to train in both cultural practices, as we've talked about, but also contemporary conservation land management, contemporary land and fire management, because importantly, we need to transform the system and transition from sick country to healthy country, and we can only do that by working together. CNRM-based economic development, looking at the development of cultural natural resource management teams. And finally, and probably most importantly, embedding Tunnerong knowledge and practice in land and water management right across country. Developing internal strategies and policies like our emerging Tunnerong cultural fire strategy, which I'll talk to now. First of all, just to give a little bit of context, and I guess some of the, or one of the hooks and driving factors for traditional owners to be able to reactivate their rights and apply cultural fire on country. Traditional owners from all parts of so-called Victoria over a period of 5 years developed the cultural fire strategy. You see the front cover there for the activation of cultural fire knowledge and practices. The strategy outlines 4 key program components to be supported and enabled by the state for reinvigoration of cultural fire knowledge and practice in Victoria. It can be found online. It's really easy to Google. cultural fire practices have been, especially in recent years, increasingly asked for by the wider public to be included in contemporary land and fire management. Traditional owners have done the groundwork, as evidenced here, over a number of years to describe what a transition to cultural fire right across country looks like at a statewide level. And we are now at the point of readiness to start to implement and further develop cultural fire programs at a nation level. Obviously, different nations are at different stages. We'll discuss and explore that a little bit further tonight. So I'll talk to Tunnerong's journey so far and some of our future plans. Tunnerong Land and Waters Council is now in the process of developing cultural fire strategy. Our ancestors managed country according to our seasonal calendar that was shaped by the life cycles of plants and animals around us. Our ancestors ran and managed country according to 7 annual seasons, ensuring the health of our people and natural and cultural resources over countless generations. We manage country for us, for Tunnerong people, for the animals and the plants that were there. It was active and it was part of our everyday life, every part of our being. A primary objective of TLORC's Caring for Country team is to expand the application of our cultural fire practices into an ongoing program of healing and managing country that has a co-benefit of providing employment to Tunnerong people as we apply our knowledge and practices associated with cultural fire. Tunnerong have a strong desire to connect with other cultural fire practitioners and knowledge holders and build relationships with other Victorian traditional owner nations to share our knowledge and experiences. This will ensure cultural fire is reinvigorated on a wide scale to heal and manage country like our old people. Tunnerong at the moment are working with Djadjerong. We'll hear a little bit about what Djadjerong are doing tonight to share our experiences where they're similar and where they're different so that we can empower and strengthen both nations' development of cultural fire, and we seek to do that elsewhere as well. The slide here is an image of the grandson of Uncle Shane Monk. Shane's been leading a lot of the cultural fire practice and knowledge reinvigoration at Tunnerong over a number of years. I've worked with him. I'm lucky enough to have worked with him and travelled interstate to meet actually Victor Stephenson and a few other cultural fire practitioners. Shane's led the implementation of quite a few burns, including this one out at Goba on a number of areas around Tunnerong country. So far, all private property. We've not done officially any burns on Crown Land Estate because it's illegal. Yeah. What this image does do is shows the sort of safety of cultural fire. Actually, can't remember how old he is. He's 3 or 4, and incredibly close. And you can see that's a fire that's less dangerous than a campfire. I'm sure everyone's seen cultural fire before, but those are always exciting images. Missed a slide. That's okay. It was supposed to be another image of the same burn. It's from a different angle, and it shows more of the burnt and unburnt patches that are there. We're in the process at the moment of negotiating resourcing with the state to expand our cultural fire program. And this is a really important and difficult sort of situation we're in at the moment, which I'll describe. We seek to ensure the Tunnerong people are the decision makers when it comes to healing and managing country within our territories. To do that, we seek the following outcomes through a Tunnerong cultural fire program. Tunnerong knowledge system and Tunnerong traditional knowledge is healed and actively being shared and utilised with our community. Tunnerong is leading the management of country with cultural fire within our territories through the establishment of our own fire teams. Our fire teams are going to look at doing both cultural fire activities, but importantly, like I mentioned earlier, understanding contemporary land and fire management. As Michael showed, catastrophic bushfires are becoming more frequent, and Tunnerong is asserting our right to be in the room, decision-making when those fires are happening, but also in the planning to prepare for and ensure that we can mitigate damages. And that's not just, you know, in the lead up to fire season, but in the years before, transforming what contemporary land and fire management looks like. Actually hadn't heard you say before, Michael, but when you talked about, you know, the issue is with management, I completely agree. And that's exactly what the sort of cultural fire strategy enables traditional owners to start to talk about with the state and have those conversations. Tunnerong informing the management of contemporary land and fire activities by government and other non-Tunnerong land fire management agencies, organisations, hopefully playing a regulatory role there too. Tunnerong people having access to country for healing and management, healing of country and people, importantly. Tunnerong people are actively managing country according to culturally significant plant and animal species and other cultural values and indicators. We are actually already doing that in a number of ways, but we seek to do that through a cultural fire program, really expand on the impact we can once again have on country. And as I've mentioned previously, research, monitoring and evaluation of Tunnerong territories and our knowledge and practices should be led by Tunnerong people. So often we have researchers coming in with preconceived ideas that they wish to confirm about Aboriginal knowledge, Aboriginal practices, the impact that cultural fire they believe does or doesn't have on the health of country and how that relates to, you know, bushfires and those sorts of things. It's important that, like I mentioned earlier, we're decolonising that approach and we're ensuring that research that is being done in the right context and in the right way. I don't know if there's another slide after that. All of this that we're seeking to achieve at the moment, I mentioned the creation of a cultural natural resource management team. We're working on doing all the planning at the moment. We have the opportunity now to have conversations and be heard. Our rights are, well, some of our rights have now been recognised by the state, and we're going to utilise that to our fullest advantage, because we have cultural obligations to care for country. Country is family. Country sustains all of us here in many different ways, and I think it's where as a society we're disconnected from that truth. We're not grounded in the truth that we belong to country as a species of animal, just like any other. The removal of Aboriginal people from so-called Australia, so-called Victoria, has resulted in unsustainable, or has resulted because of and in unsustainable land management practices, farming techniques, all these sorts of things. Tunnerong seeking to work in partnership with everybody, government, farmers, whoever else it may be, to improve the way we relate to country and engage with country, and to ensure that country is once again healthy and we're operating within our sort of carrying capacity. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the opportunity to negotiate that through the cultural fire strategy. Victoria and the rest of the country's been asking for that, the broader community. It's all there, ready to go. We just really need to get on and do it now. There is positive opportunities in front of us, but it requires everybody to really demand that this sort of thing happens again. Yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Matt. Really, really great to hear about all these messages of coming together, and not only Tunnerong mob coming together, to work on this, but also coming together with neighbouring clans and taking a sort of anti-colonial approach to that. So that's really interesting, and we'll expand more in question time. So our final speaker for tonight is Trent Nelson. And Trent Nelson is a proud Dja Dja Wurrung and Yorta Yorta man representing the Northwest region and the Dja Dja Wurrung Clan's Aboriginal Corporation. Trent has extensive experience working in land management with Parks Victoria, facilitating the Dja Dja Wurrung Ranger Program and the revival of the Janjuk Wee country fire in central Victoria. Trent is now the chairperson of the Dja Dja Wurrung Clan's Aboriginal Corporation, and his role is to support and encourage his people to deliver their aspirations on country. Welcome, Trent.
Dalkaya, everybody. That's hello in my language, in Dja Dja Wurrung language. Just like to acknowledge Matt and Mike and Kimberly, my cousin, on my Yorta Yorta side, on my grandmother's side. Just acknowledge, I guess, also the country that we're on tonight, and the elders is really important for the Bunurong and the Wurrung. For us, Dja Dja Wurrung people, we're a part of the Koorie Nation, Eastern Koorie Nation. So our language dialects are very similar. So it's really important to be here for myself representing my grandfather's clan of the Dja Dja Wurrung. I guess what I'm going to do, you've seen two different versions of presentations tonight. I'm going to be a little bit different. I'm going to change it up a bit. You're going to see a video that hopefully will get up on the screen very shortly. Now, that video, I'm not sure if we're going to get sound to it or not. We'll see how we go. Here we are. But what this video, I guess, encompasses the start of a journey. Now, for us as Dja Dja Wurrung people and Dja Dja Wurrung Clan's Aboriginal Corporation, we've gone through since 2013. We signed a recognition settlement agreement with the state government, and Matt really encompassed it really well in terms of what that means as a traditional owner corporation and a people, I guess, in Central Victoria. Negotiating a form of native title agreement with the state government. As you can see there, myself on this video wearing a Parks Victoria badge. At the moment, I work for DELP, for Forest Fire Management, and my current role is the Regional Cultural Fire and Heritage Coordinator for Loddon Mallee. So I work from Mount Macedon all the way up to the River Country, across to Mildura, and down across to the South Australian border. In my role with this is really around working with traditional owners and getting them out, planning burns and putting, I guess, their aspirations and their actions back out on country, because that's what it's all about. In Mike's presentation, we talked about, landscape and I guess the fortunate occurrence of colonisation that affected, our people, and that took us away from country. My story and Kimberly's story and Mike and Matt's story, we come from a people that are heavily colonised, that got taken away from country and got brought up in different areas. My connection is through the Yorta Yorta and the Dja Dja Wurrung. We share very, very similar kinship laws through country and through aspects of country. And it's really important that we understand that, because when we come to actually managing country and moving forward in the future, we have to understand that to work together as a people and a community, because especially with cultural fire, we need to understand where we need to put fire back into the landscape to make it healthy again, to make ourselves healthy, because it's really important. We have a lot of our people that are struggling with various impacts today through mental health, through drug and alcohol issues. And one way of achieving and supporting and making our people healthy through those impacts is about cultural fire. And that's my opinion, I believe. So as you'll see in the video here, we all work for the department. They're out there. We're all trained through the department. We actually, in a way, the burns that we conduct over the last, 4 to 5 years, we've actually done them through the departmental processes. We haven't gone out to private properties and just done them solely on private properties. The burns we conduct back home on Dja Dja Wurrung country are on Crown land. They're in national parks, they're in nature conservation reserves, they're in state forests. For us, about the way we've gone about, I guess, implementing our Janjuk Wee, which is our country fire, is about using the government process that sits in place in how they manage planned burns out on Crown land. We partnered with Forest Fire Management, and you'll see a few of the guys, Tony Scott. He's a real champion for us that we have out on our burns. He's a burn officer in charge. We need him at the moment out on site so we can tick a box to give us approval to burn on a patch of Crown land. We can't physically go out as a mob and light up a patch of area because we are still sitting under a restrictive process in government. So we're working forward and we're working through that, and we'll hopefully get through with the cultural fire strategy is a really important document that I guess Jarjarang, we've heavily inputted into that, as well as Tunnerong and other traditional owner corporations. Those documents are really important because they help us push policy, push, I guess, government, the way they regulate Aboriginal people. And they still regulate Aboriginal people today. We're not unguided by that. We still work in a government framework. But for us, it's about the way we go about that and the way we move forward. You'll see Rodney Carter, our CEO, he actually, I guess, back in 2017, started conversations at that state level when we were doing our RSA agreement. He actually started with a chief fire officer, Scott Falconer, that is based in Loddon Mallee. Those two fellows sat down, had a cup of coffee one day, and actually said, how do we start this program? How do we actually get cultural fire on the landscape? As you see here, this video was done a few months later, and you would have just seen Auntie Faye Carter. We call her Gooka as our grandmother. Now, Gooka is in that video, in that picture, she was about, I think, 83 back then. She's 86 now. For us, you'll see our elders there and our people. Some of them elders, and especially Auntie Faye, it was the first time she was out like on a cultural burn, and she's 86 years old now. She was 83 back then. You'll see to the left then an old fella, and that was my father, Uncle Garrett Nelson. And every time I watch this video, I get a bit of a choke in the throat because he passed away last year during COVID. So for me, it's really important. You'll see my family there, that a lot of them have grown up through colonisation, growing up on Mooroopna, Yorta country, growing up in Shepparton. But for us, bringing them back on country, on Jarjarang country, which is only an hour away from each other, we're bringing that and we're doing that through cultural fire. So it's not just about the impacts out on the ground. It's the mental impacts, the physical impacts. Us as a people coming back together and rejoining and talking and yarning and talking about our ceremony and bringing our ceremony back on country. That's the most important thing. It's putting ourselves back in the landscape again that we've been missing for 200 plus years. I really like Mike's presentation because it really told the story of what happens when you take something away from the landscape. And Aboriginal people are a really important part of being in that landscape, because otherwise that story doesn't get told. And it's our culture to tell our story. It's what runs through our bloodlines. Really important, I guess, for us moving forward is that we keep continuing and we don't lose fight and the sight, I guess, of what we do out on country. So one day we'll get to a point where we won't have that regulated process that stops us from going out as a family or a clan and lighting up a patch of bush because it's ready, because all of those indicators, the kangaroo grass, the themata, the fuel loads that are in there that we need to keep managing, the denseness of the tree canopies, the healthiness of the trees. We have to be out there as family managing those ecosystems that are there, because our old people did that, and our old people lived for thousands of years healthy and strong as well, and that's really important that we don't lose sight of that. For us, the way we move forward though when we plan our burns is that we go out in country, we plan our burns out on Crown land. We use the Joint Fuel Management Plan system, which sits within the Department of DELT, Forest Fire Management, and we put our burns right there next to the planned burns that are out on Crown land. We map them, we plan them exactly the same way as a planned burn. And what that actually does is that actually gives us authority then to go out there. And when we burn on the day, yeah, we've got, you would have seen Tony Scott there, a burn officer in charge. That just ticks the box, so they're happy of the risk. But we know when we burn on the day that the areas are right to burn. When we burn, we don't use a drip torch. We don't use any chemicals, any fuels. We use matches. We use our fire. We create our central fire in the morning. We have our ceremony. We welcome everybody together. And we welcome ourselves. We also welcome the departmental staff as well, because they're working on our country. And for them to do the right thing by our country, they have to be welcomed, they have to be respected. And that's a very important thing. We don't push anyone away. We don't exclude anybody in the process. From that, we spend the day lighting our area. And whether it's 2 hectares or 20 hectares, we actually let the fire do its work. We drop that match and we let that fire move around. And when that fire slows down and that tells us that it doesn't want to keep continuing, we don't force it to keep lighting, because that's the vegetation telling us that fire's done its job. They're really important things for us as indicators out in our landscape when we do that. The more we move forward as, I guess, a corporation and as an entity, as a people, and working with, you know, the regulation processes, I guess, and the policies that we break down, we'll get to a point, you know, with our neighbours, as Matt discussed, around the strength and the empowerment, I guess, is really important to put us back in the landscape. We're hopeful we'll do that, because we're already seeing the impacts of 7 to 8 years as a young corporation, as partners with the state government, that we're not another stakeholder. We're not another just friends group out there that the state can, you know, talk to when they feel like. We're holding the state accountable now. And the more and more Aboriginal corporations across the state that go down traditional owner settlement agreements, that form and become incorporated under a corporation or an entity, they build strength, and there's strength in numbers. So for what we have to do as Aboriginal people, as a corporation, we've got to make sure that we're supporting our neighbouring tribes, such as the Yorta Yorta, the Tunnerong. All of our neighbours are really important. They're really important to bring back on country. And whatever we do, maybe we can pass that on to our neighbours and they can learn. And whatever they learn, they can pass back to us. It's that sharing of knowledge. And one day, as that map that might put up of Australia, that will be back connected again, where there'll be no gaps. There'll be mob all over the country and our language systems will be back again. I'm hopeful that will happen one day. It won't happen in my lifetime. Maybe the Jarjums down here, maybe in their lifetime. Who knows? But for us, that's a glimmer of hope, because that's what our old people have left us. That's in our hearts, and that's what we have to do. That's what cultural fire is all about. It's not just about burning country. It's about, you know, building mechanisms for the future for our people to keep ourselves healthy, and to also bring you mob along for the journey, because we've got to walk together. You know, it's Naldarong Yana is our language where it says walk together. We can't do it ourselves. We need you mob out there, you know, supporting us and walking with us as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Trent. I think, again, you know, really powerful messages, and important to understand that, you know, this idea of putting ourselves back into the landscape, and what you're doing and what all three of you are doing in doing that. But, you know, the messages of the importance of fire to health, to body and mind, to land, to the broader community are really important. And I also would like to acknowledge Uncle Gary tonight and his memory. Uncle Gary Nelson was a very important man, and his legacy will live on and is showing through the incredible work that you're doing So I'm really proud of you, Cuz. So I think we might open it up to the floor for some questions. I'm sure there's lots of questions. And Beck has the microphone and can come to you. So who would like to kick it off?
I have a question from the online audience. Graham asks, as the vegetation growth has increased and changed so much since the British arrived, how do traditional fire management skills apply to this totally different landscape that exists now?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's no doubt, especially I've just spent a lot of time out in East Gippsland, and no doubt it happens in your country too, mate, where management's been gone for so long and the forests are so thick and dense and crowded. And that's not good for anyone. And it's not good for foresters. You talk to foresters and it's bad for tree growth, all these sorts of things. So it's going to require thinking outside the box. And the one thing that Aboriginal people have done all throughout, well, what humans do full stop, is adapt new technologies and do new things, you know. So we can mechanically thin forests, we can do all sorts of things to impose a structure, because that's what mob did. They imposed a structure that was suitable to them and then back it up with burning. So it's kind of a romantic notion that we can just sort of burn it back with some fire. No, we're going to have to get in there and think outside the square and get in there and manipulate and manage if we're serious about caring for country, I think.
Another question from the audience.
I think Trent's.
Oh, hi.
Trent.
My name's Mark Fletcher, and I'm a land manager of 30 years. I helped start a ranger program in Central Arnhem Land. I live in the forest on the Hume Plateau on your country. I do an ecological vegetation management plan, so I basically go and actively thin my forest. I really want to, in some ways, really emphasize, I'm sorry, my memory for names is terrible. Yourself, the one in the middle, that outside thinking, sorry, Michael, from two aspects, fire and killing foxes, because we're heavily involved in fox culling. That outside box thinking is really integral to especially post intense fire regimes. So this is less of a question as a statement, but here is a question. Land management in Victoria is absolutely dying. Like, I've seen it like basically keel over. And this is not an Indigenous problem, this is an everybody problem. Like, are you the vanguard of somehow stimulating a new appraisal of land management in this state?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Mark, follow on the end there. Yeah, look, Mark, I think in a way you're right, working in land management for quite a time now. I see it with joint management. We have joint management of six parks in our RSA area. And over the last 4 to 5 years in terms of joint management, and now we're at a point of implementation, things are starting to change. We're seeing, I guess, around the right of a traditional land entity such as ourselves taking over as a land manager and being the land manager. And I guess in a way having, so Parks Victoria is a land manager in our area, having a place for them to sit, but it's not in the driving seat, it's sitting in the back of the car. So I see moving forward, we're using technology more and more now. We're training up a lot of our staff as fire practitioners in terms of fire response, wildfire response, but also cultural burning. But then there's also around all aspects of food and fibre, water, biodiversity. And it's using, I guess, the current scientific approaches and training and methods, but we're understanding that and we're actually changing that into a Jaja Warang method, I guess, on how we manage our land. And it's a slow process, but it is moving forward. And I would say, in the next 10 to 20 years, I would see that in our area, Judge Burrung are the land manager, Parks Victoria aren't the land manager. They may delegate the money to us, but that's it. We actually are out on the ground managing country again. So I don't know, Matt, you want to add in that, bro?
Completely agree, and we have exactly the same objective. We may have talked about it at length before, but I think humans are missing from country, and when you say there's been a decline in land management, to paraphrase, I think it's the active management of country. Being out on country, reading country. Engaging with country every day and understanding, when different practices need to be applied, when they don't need to be applied. That's missing. We have central decision making, and it's not local. That doesn't just mean only Aboriginal people can do it or should do it. We all need to do it together. But I think we can. I wouldn't go as far as where the vanguard or that. In the Black Saturday, there was lots of talk about cultural fire being the words disappeared, but the sort of the answer to all these questions. I think, though, we can sort of draw a lot of knowledge and sort of understanding from an Aboriginal sort of perspective and connect back to country again. There's lots of small examples of, private landholders on Tunnerong country that I'm aware of that are doing what I assume is similar to what you're doing, active land management on their properties. They're thinning overstocked forests, and that we're starting to engage with and help to sort of guide and push those sort of programs a little bit further. There's lots of trial and error happening, and I think there's lots of groups that have tried to do that for a very long time, and it's encouraging, and we need to engage with that much more, I think.
Hi, I'm Rob. I work here actually, but I'm really interested in all of your perspectives. And I suppose I really want to know, because it has been such a long time since Indigenous people have been able to actively manage the land on their own terms, how have you each gone about rediscovering this knowledge and ensuring the continuity of it?
I don't know if that works. I'm going to give it to you, Trent, but just to maybe open a note that I talk about this a lot with state partners. It's a long time in regards to a human lifetime or like a dog lifetime or that sort of thing, but versus 60,000 years plus, it's not that long. And Trent mentioned, we're going to see these changes happen. Well, maybe he didn't say that, but we are going to see these changes happen. It won't be in our lifetimes, but we're just doing the work sort of here and now that we can. Kimberly also mentioned, that we're doing great work and that sort of thing. I think we're incredibly lucky that we're able to aid and sort of really take direction from our elders and community and put this stuff into work. But yeah, I don't think it is that long, because we do still have the knowledge and that practice and the awareness of it, and we know where it is. It's just about connecting to it again. So I'll now handball it to you, and hopefully I didn't mess up some of your thinking.
No, you're right, bud. I guess, yeah, similar thoughts that are around that. I think in the experience I've had out on country with bringing elders back on country, especially, as I said, Auntie Faye Cook, 80 plus years not being on her grandfather's country and coming out and actually knowing plants and seeing plants and hearing stories from her mother. All that knowledge that people say is lost because of colonisation, it isn't lost. It's just asleep for us. And being out on country and being back in the landscape again, the more and more we do that, the more and more we drop that match, the more and more that country tells us where that fire is, how it's working. And there's areas of country that are so degraded on my country that it's probably not going to work. It's probably not, and we know that, we understand that. But there's areas of country that still hold their value culturally, spiritually, intangible as well, and tangible. So for us being out there, it's our book, it's reading our book, it's our knowledge holder, tells us things. And the more we do things out there, the more and more knowledge we learn ourselves, and we pass to everyone that's with us. So I'm not sure if that fully answered your question, but yeah, and Mike, if you want to jump in, bro.
Yeah, what you said is spot on. Thinking from the lens of, say, the university or other agencies, there needs to be an understanding of that knowledge is there and it's asleep. And it's not just going to wake up because you've snapped your fingers and wanted to wake up. You know, it's going to take long relationship building quite often. And, you know, talking to people in Gunjatmara, and they talk about Lake Condamishn and all this sort of stuff, and how all their knowledge was held in secret because they were punished for expressing that. So that's going to take a while to reawaken, get old people on country, talk to them, and they're going to share it. You know, so there's pace going on here. And thinking expressly from kind of the research angle, you quite often get people going, "Oh, I've got this money, I've got 3 years to do it." That might take you 3 years to build up the conversation to, you know, and too often we're an afterthought. It's like, I've got this money, I'm going to go and engage with community. All that work should have been done, and then the project should have been co-created from that, and that helps the awakening. So it's not just we've got to move away from this lever pulling, segmentation, you know, binaries everywhere and isolated world, to thinking about the whole thing, I think, and be patient, I think.
Thanks for your really informative discussion so far. Involved in really catastrophic bushfires, there's two really big sectors or organisations, the CFA and the insurance sector. And I'm just wondering whether there's moves from either of those to engage with what you're doing, both in terms of providing feet on the ground and money. The insurance sector surely would be saving money by investing in this kind of management rather than paying out at the end of the day when it's all a disaster.
I think they've thought about it, insurers. The CFA were, so Trent and I both talked about the cultural fire strategy. The CFA, Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning and Parks Victoria were partners to that strategy development. Therefore, you would assume they'd be partners in implementation as well. And that's a work in progress. And part of the work that Tunnerong's doing at the moment is building the relationships and building processes for them, for us together, or Tunnerong and those agencies and many others, land and fire management agencies, to come to an understanding. So building those relationships, come to an understanding of what cultural fire is and isn't, what it can and can't do, where it can and can't work now, and where it can in the future. Trent's also described a journey and pathway that the Djadjawurrung have gone on with DALP in particular, on country in the Djadjawurrung Aboriginal title parks and reserves. I agree, it's a good question. I think we all, and when I say we all, I think, you know, not just all individuals, but all organisations, agencies, businesses, corporations, all that sort of thing. And I mentioned this earlier, we need to rethink our relationship to country and understand, you know, how directly affected by what happens on country we truly are. And it does take, you know, loss of human life and property a lot of the time for people to sort of get a bit of a rude awakening, and then a few months later and a few dozen news cycles, maybe you forget about it. So jumping on to these things and trying to maintain momentum is the way that we can sort of start to tackle those sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, look, sort of, I guess what Matt's said, it's definitely a good question. I think really, I've never ever thought of really the insurance agencies dipping into their pockets. Be good, yeah, good way forward, I think. But I reckon there's probably an understanding there as well in terms of government departments, in terms of the CFA, in terms of DELP, Forest Fire Management and Parks Victoria, in how they manage the work that they do. And Forest Fire Management, obviously, they manage Crown land, public land. Any fires that happen on that area, it actually sits under their banner to manage. Any fires on private property sits under the CFO. They've changed FRV now. They've changed sort of names as well. So I think there's a few different entities there that I guess probably is under the state banner, probably could partner better. We've had good relationships with DELP in how we've moved forward, but that doesn't mean that the one size fits all either for mobs across the state. In terms of private land, we get requests all the time to come out to private land and do cultural burning and run cultural burning. As organisations start growing and they're young, they need resources, they need funding, they need to pay people to be out there each day and doing their job. As a mob, you know, we'd love to be out there every day and not have to worry about paying bills at home and putting food on the table what we have to. So there's a level of those things that I think really need to come into play, but using the cultural fire strategy that those government agencies actually supported and partnered with, there's got to be a level of responsibility there that they actually understand they need to actually use that document and start reading it and take it off the shelf and start using it for, you know, wildfire response, but also cultural fire as well, and be accountable a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, we can hold them accountable through that as a mechanism, but it's also about traditional owner nations building the capacity and having the bandwidth to be able to do this sort of stuff. So, you know, we talk about the wonderful things that traditional owners are doing in regards to cultural fire, and it needs to be invested into. It needs to be supported more. There's you know, we can't get in and apply cultural fire right across all our territories right away because we've been removed from country, and we need to rebuild that relationship and reconnect and build all those systems. So it's a time thing. So those conversations will happen.
I think we have, thank you. We might have one more question, and I know you've had the microphone quite a while. Do you want to ask a question and then we might wrap it up?
Thank you. But yeah, sorry. Thanks so much for your talks. They're really interesting, and it was great to hear from all three of you. This is sort of something that you said, Matt, about, I guess, the different land tenures, and I think it's really interesting. And I was, I guess, something that you said, Michael, too, about like delineating wilderness space. And it's not just wilderness space that we've kind of delineated, it's this like private space and all these other things. And I was wondering what role you think cultural burning has in kind of cross-cutting these, the management of these different land tenures, and if you think that it can play a big role in kind of managing more holistically across these different segregated land spaces.
I think cultural fire is part of it. So we're here tonight to talk about cultural fire, and I think it's a large part of it. It certainly is a key practice for Tunnerong. It's also, you know, given the nature of our country, if you've ever been to central Victoria, it kind of desperately needs fire. But also it's all the other practices that go alongside that. So, you know, rehydrating, you know, floodplains, cultural flow management, these sorts of things. forest gardening, so thinning, needs to be had. You can't, or you can sort of do that with fire, but it's pretty dangerous and has pretty devastating effects to soil health, soil structures, all these sorts of things as well. So there's a whole range of practices that need to be applied. So I think, I might call it cultural land management. Could be that sort of one of those key aspects to start to understand and talk about, describe, that can start encouraging people to think a little bit differently and reconnect these landscapes again, or different, fenced off areas, different tenures and that sort of thing. Tunnerong's working with a few private land sort of farmers and that sort of thing, livestock, largely around applying some practices on, largely in pilots, on their properties to sort of see what positive effects that will have for production of grasses and that sort of thing. That's reasonably successful. I mean, it's not widespread and up. There isn't a huge uptake in it, so more conversations need to be had. I think we do need to think more holistically, and we need to get in. So far, Tunnerong's burnt on private land 99% and not on public land yet. We have the opportunity now to explore that on private land a little bit more. On public land a little bit more, and on Aboriginal freehold title, which is something we haven't talked about. The notion of land back and traditional owners as land managers, so not only ownership but management in a sort of contemporary context. So it's multifaceted. I do think Aboriginal practices, though, can start to break those barriers and siloing down.
Yeah, I can't really talk to the kind of application or the kind of applied stuff that you're doing, but I think the big issue is this notion of private ownership of property, of land, of country. It's ridiculous, really. But we are all staunchly defensive of our own private property. There's mechanisms there where the government can now, if you're sitting on minerals, for example, that aren't being mined, they can just waltz in and take them. There's mechanisms there that we can tweak towards some kind of responsibility of country. If you're sitting on a block of land, you're not caring for it, then something should happen, I think. And you can do this in economic incentives. There's these sort of forest resilience bonds or landscape bonds that people can buy into, but they require investment, and they actually require a change in mindset, of an obligation beyond yourself, which in an incredibly selfish society, it's very hard to push out, So yeah, there's all sorts of barriers, but.
Okay. Well, thank you all. That was amazing. And thank you for your questions as well, being such a great audience. I think there's quite a few messages that I'll take away from tonight, and I've learnt so much tonight, so thank you. But this idea of holding the state accountable, holding people that own properties accountable, reconstructing history to understand today, I think is really interesting. And obviously working together for the health of community and for country, and to bring back community into the landscape is, really important things to consider leaving tonight. And cultural fire is not just about country. I really liked that line, Trent. So thank you. And also thank you to Melbourne Knowledge Week as well, and Melbourne Museum, and my colleagues Kate and Beck. Thank you for doing an amazing job organising tonight, and most importantly, the speakers. So we have one more lecture in this series, which will be coming up next month, and that's fire and the present situation of fire. And this will be looking at the work in conserving the biodiversity following the bushfire, in particular, the rapid interventions following Black Summer. And I really hope that you can join us for that. And I hope we'll be able to have another in real life session and online as well. So thank you and have a great night.